And again, my name is Dr. Holland with Online Chiropractic Marketing Systems, and I offer training, consulting, and marketing services to help chiropractors maximize their potential in their practice. And it's really for a few things specifically, is so they can enjoy the lifestyle that they've dreamed. They put in the hard work and follow their dreams and passions. And I've personally opened 77 chiropractic offices in 20 states, seeing over 30,000 new patients a year, 600,000 patient visits, and have donated over $500,000 to 3 chiropractic schools, and was also a speaker at 3 chiropractic schools. And so the topic we're going to talk to today is really some of the core components of marketing. So let's go right into some of the core components of marketing. First of all, most of you have probably heard of marketing when it comes to the 5 P's of marketing. And that's your product or your service. Number 1, your price is marketing. And remember, marketing is everything you do. That's everything. The look, feel, touch, anything and everything you do is under the category of marketing. So you're always marketing whether you like it or know it or want to or not. That's marketing. Now, the 5 direct components relative to that are the product or your service. And of course, if you're a chiropractor, it's primarily chiropractic services. Your price is a factor relative to consumer consumption. The place you're at is a factor. Well, when it comes to chiropractic, the location can definitely be more important. But even after you put yourself where there's a higher probability of demographics and psychographics, the absolute most important thing is really educational sales. When we're going to get into that a little bit. And then your people, your staff, and how they're trained and how they look and how they sound and what they say, all of that is marketing. And any and all of these can work against you, just as you can help to leverage them for yourself. And of course, the last one is promotions. And so when you look under the category of promotions, really that's where it's really divided into 3 main categories. That's really where it's divided into publicity, advertising, and educational sales. And which one you use or how you use them or in what combination you use them really depends on what you're trying to accomplish and where you are relative to the S-curve of marketing. And certainly some of them are way more effective than others. And so we're going to kind of isolate and narrow down with some specificity of what is a little more effective, or actually not a little more, significantly more effective versus what is significantly less effective. And so when we talk about your publicity, or we talk about your advertising, or we talk about your educational sales, in all of those 77 offices I've opened, there were really only 7 categories. There was really only 7 promotions I did. And they may have been tweaked in one way or another, but there's really only 7 promotions that you need to know. But you have to have a couple things. You have to have knowledge and you have to have skill. But there was really only 7 promotions, but we were very good with our knowledge and skill when we ran those promotions. And we'll share some of those outlines with you here. So the most effective form of marketing or promotions is what's called introduction type of marketing. And really what categorizes one type of marketing is way more effective than the others. 2 things primarily. Number 1 is trust. The higher the trust in that relationship of communication, the more they're going to trust you and believe and hear what you have to say and accept your message, but also the less defenses and resistance they have. So obviously, we're going to have, if we have a singular message, we're going to have way more success if it's somebody that's in an introduction relationship where there's trust. And then the second category is need. So if we know there's a higher percentage of trust, and we know if there's a higher percentage of need in a chiropractic office, that's classically back pain or neck pain. So if we can communicate with our promotions, and remember, whether it's publicity or advertising or educational sales, we're going to have a greater effectiveness if we do any of those in a category of an introduction where there's higher trust and we know they have back pain or neck pain. So that is the category that we want to make sure we have systems in place, because that is where you will get it will be the most effective, and it will give you the highest return on investment. So, and one of the issues I typically see with doctors and small business owners and chiropractors is they don't realize that there's a limited amount of time and energy, or time and money, and you have to pick wisely. And what I see oftentimes is really there's no rhyme or reason with marketing plans, and it's constantly chasing one advertising program after the other, and it's never ending. And of course, that leads to not a very good practice typically. So you do have limited time and money, and so that's why I suggest you learn the basic components of publicity, the basic components of advertising, and the basic components of educational sales, and just apply those to 7 systems, and that's it. And typically, when you're pretty good at the basics of those components, that will more than maximize your office. In other words, more than get you as much business as you can physically see. And so when I opened 77 offices, we didn't have 101 different marketing programs. There were essentially 7, but we ran them with high efficiency and high knowledge. So when we look at the most effective marketing systems in the promotions, the introductions always give the highest return, the most effectiveness, because of trust and need. The second category is what's called referrals, but there's 2 types of referrals, and a lot of people aren't aware of this. Is what's called a passive referral, and then there's what's called an active referral. And basically the difference is if you give XYZ amount of service and they're satisfied, there's a small percentage of people that will actually refer a family member or friend. And I'll just tell you that statistic. It's about 3% nationally. 3% nationally, and you'll find that that'll kind of play out with your statistics in what's called passive referrals. Passive. Now you can increase that number. You can proactively increase that number to when you actually have a system in place to actually create referrals. And there's certain triggers that you, emotional triggers and obstacles, etc., that you have to have knowledge of and skill. But you can literally talk to maybe 10 people, and out of those 10 people, maybe one of them was going to give you a referral passively, and usually not even that much. And then, but if you have proactive skills, then you can get 3 or 4 patients out of those 10 people. That's called an active referral. And so we definitely teach that also. And so with referrals, you can get as much as 55%. In other words, you have a high likelihood of getting in front of a circle of influence, family or friend, or a active referral, and getting that business. And obviously, the more knowledge you have with advertising and educational sales, your likelihood goes up even higher. But you're already positioned in a very good way because there's already higher trust, so they're already going to believe you and accept you. And we already know that there's already what's called a gateway. They already have a need for what you service. In other words, it's not a paradigm shift. So they don't see it as unusual. There's a match between back pain and neck pain in them. So imagine the difference if you were in front of 100 people, that there was a high trust category. It was a high trust category versus, and they actually had back or neck pain. And then in other words, there was a need to some degree. Imagine you giving an advertising message to that group of people, or an educational sales message, or a publicity message to those group of people, to 100 people you don't know. There's absolutely no trust, and you don't even know if they have back or neck pain, any need at all. It's night and day difference how much more effective you can be with your time and money. And remember, you have limited time and money, no matter how much money you have. So we pay attention to these factors significantly because we do have limited time and money, so we want to spend it in the most effective categories of promotions. And so after the active and passive referrals at 55%, then there's something called leads. And that's leads will typically give up to maybe a 15%. It's not as effective. There's an inclination toward a little bit more of a need. Typically, there's no trust involved in a lead. There could be, but there's a little bit of trust and a little bit of need, maybe. And so if you have a publicity or advertising or educational sales in that category, then it's about 15%. So it's a little lower. So we don't want to spend a whole lot of time and money in leads. And then the last category is what's called a cold call. In other words, they don't know you, you don't know them. You don't even know if they have back pain or neck pain, a gateway that they see you as helping. And you'll only get about 1% of that business. So you better be really, really good with your advertising, publicity, or educational sales if you're going to put yourself in cold call environments. you better be really good. Your skill set and knowledge better be exceptional, or you will be headed for a lot of negative feedback. And I'll give you some examples of what I'm talking about. To give you an example of an introduction, and I'll just do a comparison contrast of kind of an example of what I'm talking about here. To give you an example of an introduction is there's really 5 categories of an introduction. And the first category, when you have a patient, the first category is the significant other or spouse. That spouse is somewhere on the S curve. They're either an 8%er looking for a chiropractor within that year, or that's a small number, so it's only 8% and it's within that year. So that's a relatively small number, but it does exist. And then there's, or they fit into the 92% category. And this is where there's huge potential. Is out of that 92% category, we know that 1 in 4 of those people do not have a need. They don't have back pain, neck pain, or headaches. They don't have the need. And so, but what we do know is 3 out of 4 of them do either have back pain, neck pain, or headaches to some degree. And how we know that is by the statistics, that it's the second leading cause of patients going to doctors in your office, or not in your office, to medical doctors, GPs. If you look at all the GPs in your radius, the very second leading reason they get new patients walking into their office and not calling you is back pain. And it's the second leading cause of hospital admission, and it's the second leading workers' compensation. So there's a huge, huge market of people with joint pain, arthritis, and back pain specifically, and neck pain. But overwhelmingly, they're not looking for chiropractors. They're doing a lot of other things. They're taking over-the-counter medications. They're restricting their activities. They're seeing other providers. They're living with it. So there's this huge opportunity, but they're not looking for you. So, but if you understand publicity, advertising, and sales, then you can tap into that aspect of the market. And so when we look at introduction systems, the spouse fits into that category. So if you looked over a year's time period, and 87% of the population has a spouse or significant other, and let's keep it simple and say you averaged, let's just round it off to say you only average 10 new patients a month, and if you average 20, just double it. Take that 10 times 12 months is 120. 87% of those are married, so you're roughly at about 95 potential patients, 95 potential people, and out of that, and if you have 20 new patients a month, then you're at roughly 200. So out of that 200, where are those numbers at? Well, 8% of them are going to actually look for a chiropractor within a 12-month period. So obviously it's better if you keep in touch with them and get that 8%. But let's face it, 8% over a 12-month period, that's a relatively small number. But that's why every now and then you will get a spouse or a significant other. That's why. But you can proactively change that. You can increase that number significantly. So out of that 200 people, and if we took away the 8%, that's 16 rounded to 20. So you're at about 180. You've got 180 people of spouses that have back pain, neck pain, or headache to some degree. And they're not looking for you. So there's this huge opportunity right in your back door. These are the people that are going to the medical doctor, taking medications, restricting their activities, all these factors. But they are not actively looking for you, the chiropractor. So we talk about how to get this business using publicity, advertising, and educational sales. So the 5 categories of introduction systems, in other words, where you have highest amount of trust and the highest probability of need. The 5 systems are: number 1, spouse. Number 2 is their children. Number 3 is their circle of influence, their coworkers, friends, family, etc. And number 4 is what's called your 20%ers. Now, one of the things you have to do when you're in business is you have to be aware of Pareto's law, the 80-20 principle. And in many, many ways, from finances to marketing. But one of the things you have to do is you have to segment your business. You have to go back to your patient base, because not all of them are the same. When you look at your patient base, it does fit into Pareto's law somewhere when it comes to referrals. There's 80% of the people that will come and go, and they'll never refer to you, and you won't see them again. And then there's a small percentage and it's really, I call it the 18-17-3, but I'll explain that here in just a second. Then there's the 20% that will give you 80% of the referrals. So would it not be helpful to identify and know who those 20%ers are? And maybe have targeted specific promotions to that group because they have already shown that they know, like, and trust you. And if we went to those people and their introduction systems, we have a significantly higher opportunity to get business if we strategically target where that business is. Well, yes, we can. So the absolute core, and I always tell doctors, the absolute best marketing system you can do is to the 3%ers. The 3%ers are called the VIPs. I call them the VIPs. You may call them A, B, and C's, but essentially they are a number that represent a far significant number than 3%. And I'll give you an example. 3% of your patients are referring 2 or more new patients to your office. 3%. Now, 20% will refer 1. That 80% could be insignificant, but essentially the 17%ers will refer 80% of the business. 80% of the business. 3%, those are the people that are referring 3, 4, and 5, and 6 new patients, not 1 or 2. Now, this is very important to segment your business. You have to go back into your files and you have to identify who these people are, because we want to put a marketing program together, a promotional program specifically targeted to the 20%ers, because I already know there's already higher trust and they've already shown the proclivity to refer. In other words, they're okay with our services, prices, and trust factors. And what if I specifically target those people for their circle of influence, their spouse, their children, their circle of influence with back and neck pain? So there's high trust categories with a high need category. I'm in an absolute sweet spot of marketing right now. Now it gets one better than that. You have to know who your 3%ers are. Your 3%ers will give you an exceptional, those are the loyal people. These are the people that will follow you. If you went to another office or you sold your office, that 3% is typically the people that'll quit because they are loyal to you. They follow you. They really like you. Now you have to know who this is and segment your business. So what if I had a promotional program to that 3%? How much more effective would it be with my publicity, advertising, or educational sales if I targeted the 3% and I targeted the 3%'s significant other, child, or circle of influence? Can you see how I would have a significantly greater return on investment? My marketing would work significantly more and the cost would be significantly less. Now, I'll take that to another step. The absolute pinnacle, the absolute best marketing you can do is 1, to the 3%ers, the high loyal people. 2, what you do to the 3%ers is educational sales. And you do it in a group format. Here's why. With publicity and advertising will only essentially attract people who are looking. So if I take that 3%er, those 3%ers, let's just round it off to 10 to make it simple. Let's say you have 10, and you certainly have more than 10 if you've been in practice any time at all. So let's say you have 10, and you have, let's say out of that 10, or let's say, that's 10's actually a small number, but let's use 10 just to round it off. The ratios aren't right, but let's use it to just make it simple. So let's say you had 3 out of, even though it represents 30% of 10, I just want to do it for the numbers. So let's say you had 3 out of 10 of those people that were, or we can say 100. Out of your 100 patients, you had 3. Those are your 3%ers. Now you can do the math and go back, how many hundreds of patients have you seen? So if you have 1,000 patients you've seen in the past, you should have up to about 30 VIPs. Now they come and move, etc., but about 87% of them will stick around. So you should easily have 20 to 25. Now, those 20 or 25 people, those are absolute gold to your practice. So what system do you have in place to communicate, market, and do promotions to those people to affect their circle of influence? In other words, a high trust category. So you have a high loyal person with high trust who's willing to go out of their way. And then you go into a category of a spouse, child, or significant other. And you know that those people have back or neck pain. In other words, a gateway that you treat. You see, that is absolute gold. That is the absolute highest pinnacle of marketing you can do. And this is why. So should you not have a marketing program in place that targets your 3%ers? Absolutely. It's the greatest, most effective marketing there is. Now, what type of promotion should it be? Well, obviously, if you do anything, you're going to be more successful than nothing. And you'll certainly, if you did publicity or advertising, that would certainly be way greater than if you did publicity or advertising to cold calls, no trust and no need. But the absolute best form of marketing to that 3%er is educational sales. And the core component of that, and then I teach that in my program, is the core component of that is when you know educational sales, you can establish need, but more importantly, you can minimize or eliminate the obstacles, and it's occurring in a venue of trust. And that's the core of all marketing. It's relative need to relative obstacles by trust. Those are the three absolute core components. And only one system controls all three, and that's called educational sales. Advertising will not control all three. Advertising can affect to some degree, out of the three, advertising really has the greatest effect with obstacles. So you're really going after people with higher need and a little higher trust and obstacles. And publicity helps to affect trust with people that have some form of need. So whether you're using a publicity program, an advertising program, or educational sales, the absolute core component, the most effective, is educational sales to the 3%. And now if you put them in a room of, say, you got 10 or 20 of those people, you just significantly leveraged your time. It's no longer one-on-one time for effort now. And so that is the absolute single best marketing program you can do, is identify your 3%ers, help to bring in their circle of influence, significant other, spouse, children, and then identify those with the need of back and neck pain, and then do educational sales to that group. And you will get almost everybody at that meeting, whoever shows up, you will get as a new patient. They've already been kind of pre-sold because they have a high trust person who's brought them, and they do have a problem. And then once you apply educational sales to that, where you're controlling and establishing need and helping to eliminate or minimize the obstacles in the circle of trust, you should just get all of those people as patients. That's the absolute most effective thing you can do. So I'm often asked, when doctors call, they say, what can I do real quick to get new patients? Well, the fastest way to get new patients is to start talking to your existing business, because there's already trust there, and start influencing them with their circle of influence, their spouse, child, and significant other. That's the fastest business you can get. Now, here's the problem. You got three categories of systems to get that business. It's either publicity, advertising, or educational sales. So you have to know something about these categories. And of course, educational sales it takes the most skill and the most knowledge. Advertising doesn't take as much knowledge and skill. You can kind of buy good advertising to that category. You don't even have to know good advertising. You can just buy it. Same with publicity, but it's not going to have as much of an effect as educational sales, because in educational sales, you control all three components if you have the knowledge and skill. So having said that, what's the absolute best type of marketing? It's doing an educational sales talk to your 3%ers and their circle of influence. That's the absolute. It's like no brainer. One of the absolute worst. So let's do a contrast. Now, obviously, all these other factors are important. Demographics are important. Psychographics are important. Geographics are important. Psychographic barriers are important. Gateways are important. USB. So all these other factors are important, and they help tighten up and increase the likelihood. And certainly you can do a 3% and totally ruin it by going outside your geographic radius. So you could set everything up great. They're outside of your geographic radius. They all want to come in, but they're not going to drive the distance to come and see you. So if you don't pay attention to these other factors, you're decreasing your likelihood. So It is important, but it's not as important as the core. But you can still destroy the relationship or the effects of the marketing by violating some of the basic components of demographics, psychographics, geographic, psychographic barriers, gateways. Now, having said that, what's some of the worst marketing you can do outside of violating demographics, psychographics, geographic, psychographic barriers, and gateways? You violate those, you're just putting yourself in a much harder position anyway. So what is some of the best marketing you can do, or excuse me, the worst, if we're looking at these categories of introductions, active referrals, passive referrals, leads, and cold calls? Well, a cold call is the worst. A cold where there's no trust and no need. So what's an example of that? Do a mall screening. That's a cold call. You don't know them. They don't know you. I mean, you're just shooting the odds. That's like one of the worst, least effective forms of time and energy that you can do is a mall screening. No trust, no need. So when you're there, if you don't have much knowledge and skill, you're just going to get the byproducts of the 8%ers. In other words, you hope to run enough people through or enough of them pass you that you get the 8%ers. Now, if you know educational sales in that cold call environment, you can certainly increase your odds because a lot of those people walking by your booth are not looking for a chiropractor, but they do have back or neck pain. They do have a need to some degree, but it will take significant skill set knowledge in educational sales to affect need and affect obstacles to have them come in. So there's all these different levers that increase your significant. So how much worse can this get? Well, let's go ahead and do a cold call, and then let's do it outside of your geographic radius. Now you're really in trouble. Now let's do a cold call outside of your geographic radius and violate a gateway. Don't do promotions based on what they naturally see you and accept you as doing, which is back pain, neck pain, and headaches. Remember, 91% of the people that see chiropractors are for neuromusculoskeletal, back pain, neck pain, and headaches. 84%, the other 7's extremity. Less than 9% have to do anything to do with visceral, the somatovisceral reflex or the subluxation. So how small of a number and how bad of a scenario can you be in if you're doing you're out of your geographic radius, you're doing cold calls, in other words, there's no trust, no need, and you're violating gateways, you're talking and you're promoting something, asthma, allergies, bedwetting, something that they absolutely do not see you as doing, that creates a paradigm shift, and it's only 1% or 9% of 8%. And that 8% is only over a 12-month period. It's not in that time frame. I mean, how small of a number and how bad can you make this? And so I see this all the time with chiropractors. And so you can definitely, and this is the difference between always struggling for business and knowing what systems to do and how to do them versus opening 77 offices, having 30,000 new patients a year and 600,000 patient visits. And all that happened in 9 years. This is the difference it makes. It's night and day. And having 2 full-time associates saturating your office, seeing all the patients they can see. This is the difference it makes because there's a tremendous opportunity out there with the 92%, not the 8%. So having said that, we're just kind of trying to put this in its proper text relative to what is better or worse marketing. So how does this relate to what we're talking about today? Well, I'll give you a couple examples of when we talk about introduction systems, there definitely should be systems in place for the 20%ers and definitely what I call the VIPs. Your VIPs need to be treated like and talked to like VIPs. I'll give you an example of the importance of that. You're familiar with the airlines and first class seating. Well, first class seating takes up only 6% of all the seats on airlines. It represents 33% of the revenue because they can charge more from that group of people because they're willing to pay it. And that's why they have VIP lounges in airports. And that's why it's frequent flyer, because they know those people are overwhelmingly supporting 80% of the revenue, not the person that flies home on Thanksgiving every other year. And so this is why they do that, to capture that market. So do you think you might need or want a VIP marketing program, a 3%er marketing program Yes, that should be the very first thing you do. It's the most important marketing that you will do. So, do you think it might be important to have a promotional program for a spouse? If that spouse fits in one of those categories, there's a high influence of trust. And do we have the possibility to know by talking to our patient if the spouse has back pain or neck pain? Yes, we do. So we have a high probability of trust and high need. So what happens to if we use one of our systems, whether it's a publicity system or an advertising system or an educational sales system? Our likelihood significantly goes up, as opposed to you not getting this business very much at all, only 8% of it over a year. Those are small numbers. And the same with if you had a child theme. There's, the children have problems that chiropractic can help, and they're without drugs and side effects and medications and all that. So you can help a lot of children with chiropractic. And so that's a high trust category. There's high trust. Well, do the math. If you have 100 patients, 87% of them, let's say, have children. The average number of children in the United States per couple is 2.3. So your number of potential people doubles. That you have the opportunity with a high trust, high need category. And so would it be important to have a promotional program that is themed for the kids for our circle of influence? Yes, it would. What about a promotional program for that's strictly what's called a circle of influence? Would it be important, if there's only 5 categories of circle influence, high trust, high need, would it be important to have a very specific promotional program in place, you do regularly, exact steps, doesn't matter if it's a publicity program, advertising, educational sales. Educational sales will always give the highest return over publicity, over advertising. But if you do any of those, you still have a much greater effect when you're dealing with your patient's circle of influence. And circle of influence means high trust. And won't you be able to find out from your patients if their circle of influence has a gateway, a need, back pain or neck pain? Would that not be relatively very easy to find? Yes, it would. So you should have a specific program. And what's the average number of people in a circle of influence? Well, 7. And we're talking mother, father, brother, sister, best friend, coworker. In other words, they emotionally care and know about this person, and they're willing to say or do something on their behalf. So 7. So go ahead and do the math. Take your new patients. If you're, average 100 a year. I'm just doing round numbers here. Multiply that times 7. Now you have a potential of 700. Apply that 700 number into the S-curve. Well, out of that 700, 8% of them are going to look for a chiropractor that year. 8%. Now that's not a high number, but it's still something if you have a program to capture versus if you don't have a program to capture. But it's definitely significant when you come over to the right side and you look at that 700, and let's subtract out the 8%. So what is that? If we subtracted out 10%, that'd be 70 from 700. So you're at 630, say 640. So you're at 640 if you subtract out the 8% that we'll be looking over here. And let's do the math and say, what's the potential in that category for the 92%? Well, we know 1 out of 4 of them don't have a problem. So if you take out 25% from 640, so that's about what, a little over 150, rounded to say, let's just say 140 to round that off. So you're at 500. So out of those 700 circle of influence, you got 500 people that have back pain or neck pain or headaches to some degree, that there's a high trust category. So what are you doing to communicate with these people? There's you can do publicity. Well, what we do is called a referral. We do what's called a proactive referral system. We specifically have a system in place to target those people because of these factors that I'm talking about. And then we also know the emotional trigger. So we don't just passively wait. We don't just wait around for 3%. We actually communicate with them to stimulate and produce the referral. And so there's a tremendous opportunity there. So these are, and of course I talked about the 20, and then there's the 20% theme. Should you know who your 20 percenters are that are giving you 80% of your referrals, that are giving you essentially 80% of your revenue? Should you not know who those are and communicate with those people? Yes, you should. So you should segment out and identify who your 80 percenters are, your 20, and then especially your sweet spot, your 3%. Should you have a marketing program in place for those? Yes. And by the way, all of those programs are either free, are very cheap, or very inexpensive. And they're the highest, most effective, especially when you know the basic components of publicity advertising, especially educational sales. When you do educational sales for those 5 categories, it's like pouring gasoline on fire. That's the power of this massive market. So what's the importance of this? Well, the importance of this is you have to talk to these people. So many times I'm talking with chiropractors who never talk to their patients. They're past patients. They're constantly doing mall screens, outside of their geographic radius with abnormal gateways, instead of talking to the 20 percenters who have referred, are referred, and know their spouse, significant other, or circle of influence has back or neck pain. I mean, it's like crazy. So you got to turn your attention to where, remember, you have limited time and money. Doesn't matter who you are and how much money you have. You have limited time. That's a fact. Everybody's got the exact amount of time. Doesn't matter how much money you have. So and what I found is the more systems that an office tries to do, the less effective they are with any of them. And so one of the philosophies I always say is just know 7. Just know 7. Just know 7 and do them well, and repeat them and keep repeating them and do them very well. And that's all you'll really need to do, especially if you understand publicity, advertising, and educational sales. So what do we need to do to set this up? What do we need to do? Well, we need to talk to these people. We need to stay in communication with these people. Why? Well, we need to stay in communication so we stay in the top of mind consciousness. You got to remember, when they leave your office, they're getting bombarded every day with 4,000 to 7,000 different marketing messages. So too often, chiropractors just take for granted that this person will come back when they have a problem, or they will refer their family member or friend. They just take for granted. And what you don't realize is 87% of the time, you will lose business for one reason. 87% of the time, excuse me, it's actually 67%. 67% of the time, you will lose business for one reason and one reason only. And it's called indifference. You're not paying attention to your people. So you think if 67% of the time you're losing business because of one category, you think you might want to put one system in place to totally counter such a large number, 67%. You think you might want a system that's called the indifference promotional system, the stop indifference promotional system, because it's such a dramatic large number? Well, that's called talking to your people. It's called staying in touch with your people, communicating with your people. Now, in the old days, and I'll share with you some of the key components of this, and it goes under, and one of the factors that we're going to be paying attention to is it increases awareness, recognition, communication. In other words, it keeps your awareness and need at a high level to where when you do a program, when you do any of these programs, any of these theme programs, a 3% or a 20% or a circle of influence, a spouse, a significant other, when you do any of these programs, if you set it up, in other words, you're regularly talking to them, when you actually do the program, it significantly works better. If you don't talk to people, you don't communicate with them, you don't create value, and then you want new patients, and let's say you do a patient appreciation day, you will not get the participation like you will if you regularly were communicating with them, giving them value. It reminds me of one doctor, we did this. We did something really simple. He just sent out a webcam video every holiday wishing them a happy holiday. Now, we did that on purpose. Now, there's a lot of other things we did, but we did that on purpose. Because when we did a promotion, we wanted a top of mind consciousness. And so when we did the promotion, he just wished him a happy holiday, happy holiday. Now remember, 80% of the people come and go. 20%, they'll stay interested and appreciate and like that. 3% will look forward to the next one. And so when we did his first promotion, he had 6 new patients immediately from that promotion, just from a video, sending out a video about an in-office promotion. Now, you go 6 new patients, you could say, well, that's a small number. Well, it's a huge number statistically based on his patients. He only sent that video to 87 people. 87 people. That's a small number. Imagine if he had 1,000 people in his file. That six number would have been significantly more. But I will tell you, the only reason it did work the way it worked is because he regularly communicated with them. So there's a law called reciprocity. There's a law called reciprocity that we take advantage of or we use. And essentially what the law is you're familiar with it. When somebody gives you something, you feel more obliged or committed to do something in return. It's a human nature. It's natural human nature. It's pretty much in every human being unless you're a sociopath. When somebody gives something, and I said give, not expect in return. When you give something with no expectations in return, it triggers an emotional response. And it's the law of reciprocity. And so one of the key components of the law of reciprocity that we do, and one of the key components of staying and communicating with your patients. And in the past, in the old days, it used to be called a newsletter. That's the way people kept in touch with their clients, was a newsletter. Well, today, it's the systems are way more effective and they're free or cheap. So back 20 years ago, before there was the internet, I had to send out newsletters, paper newsletters. I had to pay for stamps. I had to pay for the production of the newsletter. That newsletter could cost $200, $300, $400, $500, $1,000, depending on how many people you sent it to. So that could easily be $500 every time you sent the newsletter out to stay in touch with your people. And what is so much different, and remember it's text. So what is so much different today is video. And 55% of how we communicate is visual. 36% is the actual tone and 7% is the actual words. So if I was wanting to communicate with somebody, would I prefer to use words in text or would I prefer to use visual and video? Well, based on how people communicate, I'm going to naturally increase my effectiveness if I use video communication and not text communication. And so one of the most powerful forms of marketing you can use is your webcam. A video of you of your webcam. It's personal, emotional, and it's visual. That's the importance of visual. How we use that webcam? Well, we're going to use it in the law of reciprocity and state of awareness. So the state of awareness that we're talking about, remember, if you stay in front of your people, communicating with them, your mind, your brand, your name all stays at a higher state. So if they have any problems, their family members, their circle of influence, when anybody asks them if they know anybody, that significantly increases you as opposed to you never talking to them again, which is called indifference, which is why 67% of the people will leave your business. Indifference. You not paying attention to them. So it'll hurt you but you can also use it to significantly help you. And so when you use a webcam and you communicate visually and it's personal, it's you, the doctor, you can influence these other promotional systems. And I'm going to use the law of reciprocity. I'm going to give free information. I may give a periodic free product. I'm going to use these rules and principles to my circle of influence, my high trust category. So it could be as simple as doing a webcam, wishing people a happy holiday, whatever holiday it is. It could be something as simple as periodically giving them valuable information on a webcam. It could be something as simple as periodically offering Just a free promotional gift, a promotional gift. And the reason is for name recognition, reciprocity, and it's the core of stimulating your introduction systems. So when we put your introduction systems in place, the spouse system, the circle of influence system, the child system, they significantly work more if you have done these factors. You stopped indifference. You paid attention to them. You kept them, your name awareness and recognition. You did some free promotional products using the law of reciprocity. So we're tapping into a lot of emotional triggers of human influence. And so this is the power of something so simple and free. It is so easy to shoot a short webcam, do any one of these three things, and email that link to your patient base. And here's what will happen. 80% will participate to a low degree. 20% will participate. 3% will get involved. That's what will happen. Now, if you're not doing anything, you won't get those numbers. And if you don't have systems in place with circle of influence, spouse, child, in other words, you don't have promotional programs in place, and you're not using these systems to help feed it and put it on fire when you do it, you're just losing that much more business, which means you're going to have to go do your mall screenings. That's the difference this makes. Remember, you have limited time. You probably don't want to do a mall screening on a weekend. You probably don't want to do a mall screening in the evening. You probably want to be home with your family. So this is how much simple, cheap, and easy, and most importantly, effective. It's called relationships. And the other component is the leverage. When you shoot that webcam out there, just like this video, it goes on the internet. It's going to be talking to hundreds and thousands of people. And I may not even be around. I'm not even going to be around. It's going to be automated. It's just going to be out there talking to people. And that's what will happen with you, is tremendous leverage, tremendous personalization, visualization, high name awareness and recognition, laws of reciprocity with value and free promotional gifts. And so when you do one of those high trust categories, you get free business. Everything I just said was free. Everything I said was free. And all you have to do is have just a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of effort. It doesn't take much.